Hello, everybody, and welcome to the State of Web Performance. My name is Rob Ocel, and we are so glad you are here today on a very special day. Any day we get to talk about web performance is a great day, but today is also 2/22/22, or for anybody else that isn't in America, 22/2/22, which is both a palindrome and, if written digitally as you would read it on a clock, I have been informed, is an ambigram, meaning that it is both the same backwards, forwards, upways, and upside down, downways. Of course, for those of you that are here because you're waiting for Slack to come up, welcome as well. We are glad that you chose to wait out their downtime with us. But hopefully we can entertain you. But first, before we get started, I want to thank our sponsors. Our sponsor today is This.Labs. This.Labs is your partner in modern digital transformation. They specialize in mentorship, consulting, training, and staff augmentation for enterprise organizations. Find out more at this.co or send an email to hi@this.co. It also happens to be the case that this is hiring. So if you like this lovable band of weirdos and it seems like the kind of people that you'd like to spend more time with helping make a difference for people out in the industry, please reach out to us at jobs@this.co. This is also some of our awesome clients. So if you see any names on here that you would like to work with, again, reach out to us at this. As for some upcoming events, we have our State of Angular event coming up next week at 9 a.m. Pacific on March 1st. Our International Women's Day event is coming up a week later on March 8th, which should be amazing. It has been every year, so definitely check that out and sign up so you get reminders on that. JavaScript Marathon returns in 2022. We have some amazing events and talks going on there, as well as some phenomenal trainings on Remix is one that's super exciting in that batch. Women in Tech monthly mentoring session. This one is not online. It's an online event, but it's not shared as a video. So you want to make sure you sign up so you get a notification to join that call. It is an amazing event supporting women in tech and women that are joining tech. So whether you are someone that's been in the industry for a long time or somebody that's looking to break into, that's definitely an event that you're going to want to look out for. And our React mentoring event on March 22nd. As for your host today, my name is Rob Ocel. I'm a team lead and software architect at This.Labs and super excited to be here to be talking about anything, but certainly talking about web performance with these fine individuals. Jae?
Yeah, I'm Jae, also a software architect at This.Labs, specializing in sort of front end and React with quite a varied history through 10 years making computers make the right noises.
Wonderful. And today we are pleased to have an amazing set of panelists and speakers here to speak with us today. We're going to have them introduce themselves. So Katie, you want to get us started?
Yes. Hi, I'm Katie. I'm a developer programs engineer at Google, primarily focused on Core Web Vitals. Some of the things I've been working on recently is trying to figure out ways we can, further improve, I guess, Core Web Vitals performance. So, like in particular, something like LCP. That's something like a lot of sites have continued to struggle with, and then trying to figure out why that is. And then also trying to think about third parties. So a lot of times when people struggle with performance, usage of third parties is something that comes up. So trying to figure out ways to address that as well.
Great. Adora?
Hi, everyone. My name is Adora. I am a software engineer currently building mixed reality on the cloud at Microsoft. I'm also an author. I'm currently working on a mixed reality platform called Microsoft Mesh, which is going to be the platform that a lot of metaverse experiences run on / rely on.
Great. Henri?
Good afternoon. My name is Henri. I'm at the mythical web page test by Cashpoint. I've been a performance fanatic. Supporter for a little while anyways. And essentially, I'm at web page test to make sure that people know and understand performance as much as possible. And hopefully use our tool, but more specifically, I think, really lifting the sort of like conversation around performance, all aspects of it, sort of, widening the tent for performance as well. And man, essentially here to have fun. So I'm glad to be here with the team.
Great. Bolaji?
Hi everyone, I'm Bolaji. I'm a software engineer, content creator, and developer advocate. Currently working at Commerce Layer, where we're building headless commerce APIs for global brands. Currently working on integrations with different sales channels like the Vercel Commerce project and creating educational materials for developers using our APIs and our brands. And I'm super excited to talk about web performance today.
Great. And last but certainly not least, Yoav?
Yeah, hi, I'm Yoav. I've been working on the Chrome Speed Metrics team for the last year plus. That's the team that defines the core vital metrics, among other metrics. And otherwise, I've been working on web performance for a long while and have been co-chairing the Web Performance Working Group, which is a great place for, or the aim is for it to be a great place for developers to voice their opinions about the upcoming web performance related APIs and be involved in their creation. And yeah, lately I've been working on various on task attribution infrastructure in Blink, and that sounds kind of boring, but it's super interesting in terms of the applications that it can have. So we've long wanted to have long task attribution, and that kind of I'm working on infrastructure that will enable us to have that, as well as various complex heuristics that will eventually enable us to figure out and expose soft navigation metrics to the web as RUM metrics.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Now that we're through with the introductions, we will proceed on to the generalized conversation. I should remind everybody that's here watching, first of all, we're glad that you're here. Please feel free to engage in the chat. We are reading it. So if you have any questions for the panelists, please feel free to drop them in there and we'll try to ask them when appropriate. But Jay, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so to kick us all off, I was thinking that we should start with a review of where the current state of web performance is. So, do you think that things are getting better, are getting worse, and what are the biggest challenges that you're seeing out there?
I can hear my watch tick.
Okay, well, no one will jump in on that. I will. I think it's getting a little better, but like going as to say that it's solved, or I mean, I think kind of performance is like something that will never be solved. Like there will always be this tension between how you build software and how users use it. And I remember reading something a long time ago about how people, I think, were complaining maybe that like Vim was too slow or something, because like maybe for the computers that they were running on, it actually was consuming a lot of the memory. But anyway, I think it has gotten a little bit better, presumably maybe because Core Web Vitals has put a focus on it. But I think there are still areas where there hasn't been a ton of movement. So for instance, I briefly mentioned LCP earlier. LCP is a Core Web Vital, but in general, actually, the whole idea of looking at how quickly, visually a page loads isn't necessarily a new idea. And that, I think, there's still room for improvement there. We're not seeing 1 second LCPs or anything like that. So.
I'm going to chime in and stay on course a bit, but slightly off in a sense that are things getting better? I would certainly say yes. And the reason being is that I think more people are paying attention to web performance, So, for everyone, for anyone who's been around performance for a little while, will admit for sure that, you know, the fact that people are just forwarding performance data, you know, randomly, I think is a wonderful thing, you know, because again, say 3 years ago, I don't believe this was the case. And I'm, you know, I know I have a couple Googlers here. I'm not here to, you know, gas you guys up or the team up, but I've said this before. I'll say it again. I think the web performance conversation has gotten a little bit more public. I think due to Lighthouse, because the fact that it was basically in the browser and people could sort of just, you know, pull up a score and share it, I think was very important. And then following that, I think the conversation around Core Web Vitals also sort of expanded the tent. So I think, again, the fact that more people are paying attention to performance only means that performance is moving forward. That being said, I think it is on the up and up.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I'm not sure, maybe it's skewed a little bit by, you know, where I was in my performance journey, but it seemed like, say, like 5 years ago, a lot more of the conversations around performance that I saw were trying to make a case for the value of caring about performance or talking about which metrics that you should choose. And I feel like the conversation has matured a little bit. So now it's more like, oh, you should be measuring these things, or and getting a little bit more into the implementation and nitty gritty rather than like, is this something we should even care about in the first place? So yeah, very much agree with that.
Yeah, I have to join in on the cautious optimism there. And I think that things are looking up. People are paying more attention. And it seems like Core Web Vital has enabled a lot of focus in the industry, both on the web developer side as well as on the browser side, because browser engineers, at least like on the Chrome side, are also now focusing on optimizing for those metrics, which like one example is the recent rollout of BF cache support in Chrome that resulted in significant improvements. And that is like, I'm not saying that Core Web Vitals is the only motivation for that, but it certainly helped measure and, motivate that kind of rollout and those kind of benefits that are now being rolled out to, to Chrome users without web developers having to do anything. That those are benefits that other browsers have benefited from in the past, and Chrome users weren't. So this is great, and developers don't have to care about it to the extent that they're not using APIs that are preventing BF cache from being effective. But so I think overall, there are reasons to be optimistic, and I also think that Henri, the web page test and the latest revamp is also a huge place. So it is for developers that are already they already care about web performance. This is where they go to test. But the latest revamp is introducing a lot of tools that are making it so much easier for folks to that care about performance to actually improve their Core Web Vitals, to actually improve their critical metrics. So
I'm happy to talk about that for an entire hour if you want. So let me know.
Okay, just to chime a bit into that and kind of like not really delve a bit from the optimistic aspect. I believe the Core Web Vitals and Google Lighthouse has kind of like brought some kind of evolution where people pay more attention to web performance. But then I think there's still a bit of some organizations or some fields where there isn't so much focus on performance yet. I think businesses that kind of like benefit from performance in terms of revenue kind of like are paying more attention to web performance now. But same for I feel like academics and the medical field, right? I was recently working on an academic performance evaluation for some websites, and while performing some literature reviews, I figured that a lot of research has been done on quite a ton of websites, right? And different results have been gotten from this research, and each of this research kind of like brings the same result, that majority of organizations in the academic space, in the medical line, have the same outputs in terms of performance, but then nothing seems to be done each time. So it feels like more people on the business side and the developer ecosystem are paying more attention, but then the fields where humans interact directly with that kind of like are not the direct source of revenue for these businesses, like medical and all of that, are really not. Maybe they're just not aware of the impact yet, and just they're focused on the physical interactions, but then not the virtual interactions that comes from websites and all of that. So yeah.
Awesome.
Great. So y'all touched on this a little bit, but one of the things that I perceived is that if you go back a couple years, I mean, it's probably still the case, but certainly it was really the case in the conversation a while ago with the single page applications, SPAs being all of the web development that was out there. And with new frameworks and new libraries coming out, and NPM being a very efficient way to bring in code to build things effectively, we saw bundle sizes really kind of explode. And that was what a lot of the conversation around performance was about. We have a lot of new technologies, a lot of maturing libraries with every version. They talk about how much slimmer they are, how much more easily tree shaken they are to reduce in size. We see a lot more push for static site generation, or server-side rendering has become more ubiquitous. Are we seeing any improvements with package sizes in general? Is that still the biggest thing that is dragging on web performance, or are there other things that are starting to surpass it?
Okay, I'll jump in on this one, I guess. But something that immediately came to mind when you were talking about that is there are, sites that are like actively being worked on, and there are sites that aren't. And so, like, I think big package sizes, if you look at the web as a whole, tend to be a big issue, because, like, for instance, you still see like a ton of sites running jQuery, and you could come up with all these like technology improvements, but they might not have any impact on that because that site just isn't actively being maintained. And so you can, I guess, do things to move the bleeding edge forward, but like the trail, like moving that, I don't know what the term is for, it can take a really long time to shift. So that doesn't exactly answer your question, but that's something I've been thinking about a lot. And the tricky thing is how do you try to go out and affect those sites or those bundles or those libraries. I think it's tricky.
I mean, as Katie mentioned, there is history and legacy just sitting on the web right now. Like a rusted parked car, just sitting there. What do you do about that? Well, there's not a lot you can do, and that's why I always sort of try to think in the now. And it gets back to what we've been able to sort of witness in the last couple of years, which is and I'll probably touch on this a little later again, which is, I think, performance literacy, and understanding what you're doing with the packages, the tools that you have to create the user experience that you require for the app that you're about to deploy. And that being said, I think that you have to go in with this sort of this optimism, as Yoav describes, is that you're going to go out there and try to do the best that you can. Performance has gotten a little bit complicated. I'm sure we'll get to that at some point, but the literacy, I think, is going to be important. But I try to break it down as in the simplest terms as possible. Like, well, I mean, I'll get to that a little later, but ultimately I do believe that the literacy is going to be important. What you're doing with the packages and or the resources do you have that you have at your disposal, are you managing them as best as possible? Because ultimately web performance is resource management, and moving forward, this is something that you have to keep in mind at every step, so that you have something as performant as possible. Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to your question, like, is JavaScript bundle the biggest hurdle? So I don't know if it's the biggest hurdle, but it's the most obvious one. So it's like trimming down your JavaScript bundles, you may run into other issues. But if you have a 3 meg JavaScript bundle in order to render anything, your site is not going to be fast. So it's a prerequisite to actually like doing that, like ideally not rely on JavaScript at all for rendering, as well as like, or minimal JavaScript for interactivity. That's the ideal. But if you're not there, you need to make sure that it's like you're requiring minimum amount of JavaScript for your initial render and interactivity, because otherwise, this will surely be the very first bottleneck that your users are going to hit. And then there could be others, but that's the most urgent one in most cases.
Yeah, maybe like another bottleneck that comes to mind is like resource ordering and how people go about loading things. But I think part of the reason why we tend to talk about bundle sizes a little bit more is like there's more historical precedent for it. It's also easy to talk about because it's very measurable. Generally, the fixes are fairly straightforward. But I think because the way things are loaded on a page can vary a lot of those optimizations, it's harder to measure, it's harder to quantify. So I think it's easy to fall back to talking about JavaScript bundle sizes. But like JavaScript, the amount of JavaScript you have on your page is still really important. I won't take that away.
I mean, it certainly is a low-hanging fruit. And I think it's part, again, of the sort of quote-unquote literacy I like to sort of discuss, and which I will discuss a few more times. But yeah, like it's, again, a bit of the 80-20 rule. There's this 80 part that we can deal with, fairly clearly, and then that last 20, it's like you get into the weeds and you start to make some adjustments. Shout outs to Jake Archibald, who's in the chat, by the way. Always good to see him. Good evening. Providing some good commentary, but he's absolutely right in some of his comments here. There are other areas that can be pretty tricky in it, but I mean, I'm sure we'll get to that a little later because we have some fine hosts here.
I want to say something about Rob's question. And I kind of want to say, I'm kind of bringing my own perspective because I don't work on the web anymore. I am sort of like a mixed reality engineer now. And I kind of want to say, I kind of like agree with what everyone has said, which is like the JavaScript bundle size thing is a problem, but it's like a problem that you can easily quantify. And it's like maybe not the biggest problem, but like maybe like a very common one. And I kind of want to say that it also depends on the kind of websites that you are trying to optimize in the first place. And I'll use my domain as an example. So you have the JavaScript bundle size problem normally across different kinds of websites because I don't want to say this, but JavaScript is okay, I'm going to rephrase, so that I don't get attacked at a point. I'm going to rephrase this and say that JavaScript is a very important language on the web. That's not how I wanted to say it initially, but that's how I've chosen to rephrase it. But when you're looking at maybe you're building some kind of 3D experience on the web that has maybe a VR edition, and then you're trying to create a web experience so that people can wear, headsets and still either have that experience via a browser when they're wearing a headset or just on their laptop. So it's like a whole 3D in 2D kind of experience. Now you're dealing with more issues than just your JavaScript bundle size, because there are going to be a lot of 3D assets that you have to render there. They are going to be like, so now those 3D assets, sometimes sound, sometimes those different interactions, sometimes more times as well, the JavaScript bundle size. And it's now like there are many problems, or rather there are many things that you sort of have to optimize for to make sure that that person having that web experience in 3D is having a rich one. So I think that it is a problem, like a big problem, but it's not the only problem. And depending on the kind of website that you're building slash working on, you might have more problems.
Absolutely. And you know what? I'm gonna, since things are getting jumpy in the chat, I'm gonna mention that yeah, we like to talk about JavaScript in, in whatever terms, but there are blocking resources that are just not just JavaScript. You can have CSS as a blocking resource, and I once again get back to the idea of the literacy in web performance. Like, for you to have a good understanding of that, the literacy will be important. And getting back to what Katie said, once you have a little bit of this literacy, you'll also understand that the order will be important in the rendering of a page. So by the way, web page test will let you know which sources of blocking are there, but we can get to that a little later again. But the point is that once you have a better understanding of what is actually taking place, and you'll see that it's not always the classic you know criminals on the page that are sort of hampering the resource loading. So yeah, I mean, everything that everyone said, like, big +1 there. But you'd be surprised once again, with regards to the resources online, which ones are creating some of the problems out there.
I wanted to jump in and ask a question that's coming up a couple times in the chat, and I'm going to ask it in 3 different ways. Feel free to engage with it on any of those 3 avenues, or a different one in the spirit of that, which is...
You'll get 4 different answers.
There you go. Right. Make sure your answer accompanies all of them. But no, so the way that I had originally formulated this thought was just observing how many businesses came online during COVID to try and reach customers that previously hadn't been. And what I've also observed is that the price of building software seems to simultaneously also be going up, which means that bespoke software solutions and the big firm and the high-priced developers are out of reach of a lot of these businesses, which means that you have a flood of newer engineers or amateur engineers or people that are just picking it up on the side or using third-party tools, coming into the space, trying to build these experiences and competing with established large-scale operations that maybe have had a lot more engineering go into their performance. So the question is what are some things that maybe some of these developers that are either working with like assistive tools, any of the site builders or any other related tools that help people get online more easily, or what should small teams be really mindful of? What kind of things can they do to level up their performance? And of course, people that are new to web performance, that are just listening to a lot of these conversations for the first time or are new to the industry, how should they be looking to get involved? Like, how do we get more literacy, I guess, is the topic that we're on now.
Katie, do you want to start as always?
If anyone else has like a informed opinion on that, please.
I mean, I heard commerce, so
I can provide it, but
like commerce was mentioned, so I don't know. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So my initial thought is I think that is a tricky problem because when you are going with these preformed tools, like a lot of what makes them so convenient is that you don't have to, they take care of most of the implementation. But that's like a double-edged sword, because if there are performance issues in their, platform, you may or may not be able to influence that. And I think depending on the situation, how much influence your platform is having, can vary. So, like, to use an example, I think sometimes people want to blame their tag managers for the performance issues, but it's also a lot of problems also stem from what they're trying to do with the tag manager. And unfortunately, I feel that's a not very helpful thought for me to have, because there is no place where you can go to say, show, compare these things for me, or tell me about their performance. And so like the best you can advise is just, tell people to be aware of performance when making those choices.
Okay, I'm going to go in second as usual. First, I want to give a shout out to Patrick Meaning, who's in the chat. Hello. Always good to see him. Yes, I think the pandemic certainly has, sort of, I don't say, zoomed in on some fissures that are there, but, we certainly grew in reliance over the web. That's without a doubt. I like to bring up the example of the Waffle House index. You know what I mean? If you can sort of make your way through a storm, with your device, it's because the parallel is the fact that the Waffle House is still open during the storm. Like, these things are real deal, and the fact that say a platform like Shopify has a performance team, I think is very indicative of the goals, right? I'm not saying that every platform out there is supposed to build one, but they're keeping that in mind. I've been a big fan of sort of watching what a platform like WordPress is doing, because they're now also building a performance team. In fact, it's Tuesday today, and they just ended their performance meeting. It happens every Tuesday at 11 o'clock, I think, and they go through like the priorities for the week or whatever it is. I believe, again, I get back to the idea of a little bit of literacy can take you a long way. If you understand what, say, some of the low-hanging fruits are, you can start to tackle these very early in your process, so that you're not, you don't end up with whatever it is that ends up happening later on down the line, especially in e-commerce. E-commerce, also a big fan of that that kind of situation, simply because I've always thought of e-commerce as like a lot of your challenges rolled into one big burrito. You know what I mean? Images issue, JavaScript issue, like you're trying to buy a product. Like, there's so much going on. And I recently had a conversation with the people at View Storefront, because we're going to start to talk about these things in these kind of webinars, and they're tackling this very early in their process. So I think this is something absolutely important in sort of educating the community around it. I keep coming back to the literacy in the education. I think it's so important.
Maybe something I would add to that is, if you are running very lean, like, you don't have a huge engineering team, we tend to talk about like, oh, you should have these like big fancy monitoring setups and this and that. But really, like, even just something as simple as like when you go to add a widget to the page, like pull it up in DevTools, compare how much resources were loaded before and after. We tend to talk about these like very fancy things, but sometimes like you don't have to do the fancy things. You can get a lot of value of just looking at things like that. And so just kind of like being aware and doing like a quick before and after. And then I guess maybe just being aware of the idea of trade-offs. Like, I think it's easy to think like, what's better than one marketing tag, like 10 marketing tags, and that there's no, you're not giving up anything, but you may be giving up something. And I think if people don't come from a performance background, they're like, well, just that, like, more images is better than less images, or 10 fonts is better than one font. And sometimes for particular use cases, like, I think in some cases in retail, like, you do want lots of images, but just being aware that sometimes there might be a trade-off or a reason why you wouldn't want to just put, every tag, every widget ever on your page. So.
Totally.
Yeah. So to build on that, I think that there are, like, even for small teams, using the existing platform, so WordPress or Shopify or Wix or like any of the other, like what I'm seeing on Twitter is those platforms competing with one another on their stats and on their core web vital pass rates. And all of them, I don't remember which is the current winner, but all of them are doing better and better. And I think that out the bat, all of them are good enough for folks to build businesses on, as long as they don't add on stuff that is unneeded. So I think that the failure point there is like for WordPress and for Shopify, and like is adding on like various themes and add-ons that add craft that is not needed. And that is something that folks that are like, they don't have a lot of experience run a risk of doing. And I think what's important there is just have the discipline of testing everything you're adding to the page to see the impact, and then decide whether this thing is worth the negative performance impact, presumably, and seeing whether this is like the right trade-off to make. So
Did you just say testing?
Server side, I said testing, yes. That is true for server side add-ons. It's true for client side, third parties, and tag managers. So basically, yeah. Test before you add things permanently to your page that will be hard to pull out later.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I was going to mention about testing and measuring, but I think the responses from Henri, Katie, and you have kind of like covered everything around that. You know, we can overemphasize the essence of literacy and measuring, because like Katie mentioned, there are a lot of trade-offs, and these trade-offs kind of vary based on your users and the kind of like markets you have to attend to, right? And this is the more reason why you need to understand what you're trying to do and who you're working with, because the efforts you need to, measure and make changes to a user in a particular country kind of varies, because no matter how hard you try to, improve the performance of websites, right? Internet connectivity and all of that still plays a huge role. So you still have to do more work in this particular region based on the connections they have. So I think understanding the business value and the demands from your users is a key point, and that would influence what you're measuring and the kind of trade-offs you would want to give. Yeah.
Yeah. So moving on, I'm quite interested in hearing. So in the JavaScript ecosystem, there's, I think, performance has been a salient topic, especially amongst the developers of frameworks and libraries. And we're seeing a lot of them come out that there's an effort to shift JavaScript away from the client and towards the server, whether that's, Next.js is doing it. There's compile time tools like Svelte or Astro, and Remix is coming on the scene with all these claims about performance. And do you think this sort of shifting JavaScript like radically away from the client and towards the server, is this like a potential like big new dawn for web performance, or is it just a lateral move?
I don't know if I would call it a new dawn as much as I would call it going back to basics. But yeah, running a lot of JavaScript on the client side is not a good idea performance-wise, or so, because you have to download that JavaScript, you have to execute that JavaScript. It's doing a lot of DOM operations that if you can do all that at build time, that is better, because you're doing it once on like either on your development machine or in a server, and that is being applied to all of your users. If you cannot do that at build time because of dynamic constraints, then applying that JavaScript or applying that logic on the server with appropriate caching to reduce and amortize the costs, that's the next best thing. And then the worst thing performance-wise is just run everything on the client. And so to me, this is less of a new dawn and more of going back to the basics of let's make sure that we're serving HTML to like meaningful HTML to users, and then sprinkle some JavaScript on top instead of applying all the logic on the client side for everything.
Which
But
gets back
yeah,
to
but generally it's a great trend. I'm all for it.
I know I'm just super excited as technologies come out like Svelte and Remix and others. I mean, not to hype any one particular library, but I'm loving this idea that people are playing with recently of keeping the developer experience of these frameworks, but using some form of tooling to compile as much of the JavaScript away into static HTML as possible. I just, that has me so excited for what people are going to be able to build and are building right now. So I know at least that much. I'm excited to see, because I know that was a big resistance point for a long time, is people were like, but I've gained so much developer experience. I've been able to build such more complex experiences because of these frameworks. I don't want to give up on them, but there was never specifically an attachment to the single page application framework. It was just, that was an avenue where a lot of engineering was going to enable that. So I've been really excited to see people find ways to maybe compile as much of that away as possible.
Yeah, earlier we talked a little bit about bundle size, and I think maybe the consensus was like it's a big thing, but it's not quite all of it. And so I see these changes as being very good for addressing that issue. There are some other issues where that's not necessarily, like there's a lot of talk in chat about CSS. Changing how you address your JavaScript isn't necessarily going to address that, but it's a big step in the right direction.
Yeah, I was interested in bringing it up just because I'm like Rob. I think I'm very excited by the possibilities that are being opened by these tools. But on the other hand, when I have worked on performance for sites, JavaScript, like, oh, you have an SPA and the SPA has a big bundle size, is not something that has been like the core blocker to a good experience, compared to things like, we have mentioned the 20 different marketing tags, which can be much harder to remove than doing good code splitting or server-side rendering, and things like image pipelines, and all these, which are really go back to organizational problems rather than just having slightly better tooling on the JavaScript side.
I mean, you mentioned the tag management. I always refer back to a gentleman by the name of Zach Tolman, who I believe works at Condé Nast, and big company, big publishing company, and they have a bag full of tags, and he talks about just as we're being asked to live with COVID, he talks about living with the tags. And he's like, you have to be able to manage them. And I get back to the idea of the literacy, but specifically, what Yoav would agree with, which is testing, and you're able to see the true impact and hopefully defer some of it, whatever is needed, but it comes back to being able to have a complete visual picture of what needs to take place, what's a P1, what isn't, and you move forward from there. So yeah, you do have some of these organizational challenges, but it's about like living with the demands that are being made of this website, and then hopefully through measurements making it as friendly as a user experience as can be.
Great. A question that was it's been asked a couple times so far is a question, and it's related to testing, which we've been talking about, which is I can certainly relate to the feeling where something is slow, or the client has reported that it's slow, but then you're stuck. You're not able to figure it out. We might know about things like Lighthouse or web page tests, and even some people may not know about those. But one of the questions is just, how can people start to see more of what's happening, either what's happening on devices that their users are using, or just trying to figure out why this crash seems to occur for these users, but we can't make it happen on anything that we have in front of us. So any advice you have for people in that situation?
I mean, I'm going to jump in real quick. Okay. I'm sorry. we have like a film strip and a little visual comparison, so you go into web page test, you could drop in the URL or a couple URLs, in fact, if you want to make some comparisons. But the point is that you can have a very detailed rendering of the page through visual animations, right? And you can start to see some of the differences potentially in different markets, right? Because we could also test in different markets in our case. I forget, the conversation was around like connectivity and whatnot in different parts of the world. Yeah, these are very important details, and I feel like we've sort of, talked about this a lot, beating a dead horse, whatever expression you want to use. But there are a lot of people still testing in very comfortable conditions, and surprise, not everyone's in that same situation. So testing, measuring. Okay, I'm out.
Yeah. So I agree, but I think that in some cases, lab testing is not necessarily sufficient, or it's you need to be lucky in order to find the problem that your users are seeing in your lab measurements. And in order to reduce that luck component, we have a bunch of web performance measurement APIs that enable you to gather data from the field and being able to split that in order to find that particular problem. And so you get that report from your user that is somewhere in the world on some device, but you can use RUM data in order to try to pin down the root cause and try to understand whether this is something that is coming from a particular resource being overly slow. And you can see that with resource timing, or some of your events, like the user's interaction is being particularly slow, and you can use event timing to see that. Long tasks. There are a bunch of APIs that we also have recently shipped in Chromium only, but the JavaScript profiling API. So you can do actual sampled profiling on some percentage of your users and try to figure out those cases. And like, in case that the root cause for the slowdown is some JavaScript execution, you can see which function that is from those sampled profiles. So there are a lot of tools that enable you to like go beyond lab and get data from the field that will help you pin down the root cause for that problem. And there is no ready made solution. You will have to think through the problem. That's why we're being paid to be engineers. But that is like what we have a lot of tools that can help us do that work.
Yeah, I mean, I like that you've mentioned that it's not a fixed process where you have to just stick to doing this part. And sometimes the problems actually come from traffic itself, not necessarily from the architecture you have, right? It's possible that when you launched, you just had 10 users and everything was working fine. And that's why testing and measuring is essential, so you notice where the changes happen. So you need to be ready to scale, or even before you have to scale, you need to be sure that you are able to scale to the number of traffic you're getting. And that way you might not even have to do so much in terms of like fixing performance issues. It's just scaling. And that's something you will most likely want to note.
Absolutely. And I agree with both your cases. I feel like I may have been answering like one part of Rob's question, but pardon me. I mean, let's talk about the YouTube feather experiment. Like it's 10 or 15 years old now, but it was very key in development. For those not familiar, basically YouTube wanted to sort of slim down their page. They're like, yo, work on this. And they ended up doing so. But in deploying, they found out in particular regions of the world, they're still like very challenged users. and they were only able to find out when, by sort of collecting some of this rum data and discovering that, people were willing to wait now because they were getting even like just like a minutia of bytes coming down the pipe, despite the fact that before they got absolutely nothing, but they were still waiting like 2-3 minutes. So yes, testing and getting real user metrics out for us to sort of comb through, very, very important. So yes, agreed.
Adora, I'm kind of curious with the experiences that you've been working on. Like, how does this testing play out for the types of things that you're working on? Is it mostly the same? Is it greatly different? Is there a wider range of user equipment and hardware to account for? Like, how does it work for the types of things you're on right now?
It's kind of different, right? Because if you're thinking about, so let me go back to what I said initially about the different other things that you have to deal with. Like Henry said, different other looking resources that can exist when you are trying to create that experience. You have to account for those things and also have to remember that, like Bolaji said, you are building for different types of people that would have different internet connections, that would have different types of phones. And it's funny how recently I was running like a test on a particular service that I'm working on, where I was checking like, okay, to run these simultaneous requests, how, like, what was my CPU usage and stuff like that. And it's funny because, and the reason I'm bringing that up is because yesterday I was using one of my laptops and I was running God knows how many processes, I don't even remember at this point. And then I had a Zoom meeting as well. And then the Zoom meeting was on the side. And Zoom had this whole tiny thing that popped up and was telling me about how my audio might not be so great because I'm almost maxed out on CPU usage. And this is something that when you are having these kinds of experiences, you're going to have to deal with maybe a lot more than normal, because it is almost every single second, something in that virtual environment is changing. Someone is either moving around, or maybe if it's a game and it's, like what are those things called? Non-player character, I think that's what they're called. If it's a game and it's an NPC that is moving around or something, like the state of that page changes and you always have to sort of account for that. So your CPU is always busy. And then there's also the memory bit, because you're going to keep using assets and destroying them and then using them. So it's like the experience is trickier and more annoying, if you ask me. But I mean, I think it's also a good thing that these conversations are being had, because that's like one step to getting everyone to understand that this is something that, even if it's from a selfish perspective, you have to do for your customers, because you don't want them to go because you want their money. Either way, it's something that people still constantly need to talk about. And it also gets us to not, I think it's also going to be a good thing if we don't just think about this from the perspective of being devs, but also users too. And I think that because we can be both, depending on where we find ourselves, it makes us have more, empathy to when we're building stuff, and carry that energy into how we build it. Just wanted to say that as well.
Yeah, just to add just a tiny thing to what Adora said in the concept of human-computer interaction, right? It's really nice we take things from that aspect, because sometimes a lot of the problems even comes from the features, the so-called features we think we are adding, which are not necessarily necessary. I mean, I was recently using an application that had this kind of transition animation, which kind of affected me mentally, because it seemed nice, but it was slow. It had this, I don't know how to explain it, but the speed and the whole transition kind of wasn't necessary to me. And I think that's something that quite a number of businesses or organizations or applications or engineers even put, we want to put all the whole cool stuff, the whole creativity, the user experience, but we end up adding things that are not necessarily, they're not necessary. I mean, so like that's something we should, we should put the human computer interaction as the first thing also.
Yeah, I was just going to move on to what might be our last question now, which is that to pick out another thing from the headlines, there's been great results of using AVIF for images. So, do you think that's like now on the level of like, well, it's a no-brainer if you have an image pipeline, it should be emitting AVIF as one of the results, and maybe more broadly, what can people do about images, and what about organizations that maybe don't have an image pipeline or are just pulling things directly from a CMS, and how do they handle performance problems related to images and other large assets? Also, do you pronounce it AVIF or AVIF?
It's GIF, soft V. All right. Patrick Mean in the building, JPEG Excel. Hey, listen, I don't know if I should start because this show might end at 2:00.
So I think I'll just start. I mean, AVIF sounds kind of new to me. I remember the last kind of standard was WebP and all of that. But I think what I would say, because images happen to be one of the major problems, especially in e-commerce and all of that, it's annoying because we now have better quality images, and we always try to want to keep that on the web, which it's getting much more harder because you have to trade off some quality over performance and all of that. So it's not easy, even though I know there are kind of like new techniques and methods that have like made it easier, lazy loading and all of that stuff. But aside from these formats, AVIF and the others, I think you just need to realize that there's just nothing you can do to, maintain the same high quality you have on the user aspect. There's going to be some trade-offs which will take the quality down to some extent and all of that. But the entire aim is to ensure that you're still able to deliver the best experience, and that's why you have to then pick between stuff like AVIF and the rest. So I want to hear from others because I personally, images is kind of like one of the biggest problems for me. So yeah.
I mean, okay, so I think we have like multi-pronged issues here, and can someone check the calendar? How old is the web? I think it's like 30 years old or something like that. Okay, so I think one of the main issues right now is the fact that we have found comfort in the small handful of images we've had. So, JPEG, PNGs, GIFs, SVGs, they're combined 100 years old, like 105, I think. In fact, JPEG turns 30 this year. All right. Now, we also have hit this inflection point. It probably started, let's say, a couple of years ago, where we're finally able to have modern images used on the web. AVIF went stable, I think, in Chrome like 85, I think it was. WebP was finally, like I like to say, closed the Apple rings, with all the browsers supporting it. But people are still kind of resisting, right? So I think AVIF is a coming conversation. JPEG Excel is a coming conversation. WebP is a now conversation. Because again, it's being supported all around. So I think that has to become a bit more of a standard. But of course, with AVIF being right around the corner, people we're like humans. Developers are humans. We like new stuff. No one likes to drive an old car. Everyone wants a new car. People want the new AVIF format. Yes, it's going to be a little smaller. Yes, you're going to have like potentially better quality, but the support is not everywhere right now. Now, CMS was being mentioned. A lot of frameworks, a lot of like companies out there, like like Gatsby and like Vercel, and I could go through like Blitz and Prismic. They're all using, trying to use or allow developers to use modern images, right? Under the hood, a lot of them using this thing called the oh my god, Sharp. And Sharp is allowing people to use WebP, use AVIF. Got it. But like was said, images are complicated. But I do believe that you can start to really have some impact by making sure that you use a very well supported format right now, which is WebP. And I know there's some detractors out there. I get it, but WebP is still an available format that's going to give you smaller sizes, decent quality. And I mean, like, you could literally only use WebP if you wanted to, is what I'm getting to. But again, I think people have to know that it's available, and they need to go forward and use that. So I could talk about some more about this, but I was trying to keep it short.
So I would say I would encourage people to try out AVIF. The one thing that they should probably be aware of is that the encoding speed, it takes a little bit longer to encode than existing formats. And if there's any like big downside to AVIF, that's it. I think I can't say definitively, but I think that's probably like a key focus right now is to work on improving that. And unfortunately, off the top of my head, like I don't know if for most people the encoding speed is actually something to be worried about. It also might depend on like your image serving setup. Like, are you trying to generate the images on the fly, or are they generated in advance? So that's why I say it depends. Try it out. More broadly, I think what would benefit, which is universally good advice, is if your site doesn't have a like image serving setup, like a system or image CDN, adopting one of those would be really helpful because, in addition to image formats, there are compression and resizing, all these other optimizations that are a lot easier to use if you have that in place. And that type of platform is also going to take care of generating the AVIFs as well. And then also with that, adopting use of the picture tag is going to pave the way for serving different formats, whether that's WebP or AVIF. So using the picture tag and then just optimizing your image serving setup are two things I highly recommend that people look into doing.
So I've sat at the table and in meetings, I don't know if y'all have as well, where the developers have gotten a ticket that the site is slow, and maybe it is because of these images, and they kick the ticket back and say, well, tell the marketers to put smaller pictures in the CMS, and the marketers pass it off to the engineers and go, I just put in the picture that I had, right? And there's a lot of like that hot potato thing. So I kind of wanted to just touch briefly on the sort of around the same topic. Like, do y'all have a pep talk or a process related feedback for, how people should react to this? A lot of the times what we try to say is that as a team, you have to own this. And so I think it's a combination of technologies, and like Jay was talking about, like everyone was talking about, setting up these pipelines. But, sometimes the teams can kind of just get into that sort of finger pointing mode, or it's not our concern. Like, what would you say for teams or maybe even engineers that are sitting here like, that sounds a lot like the meeting I was just in? How do they break through, or what is their pep talk?
I think I'll steal Henry's word of literacy, right? I think that's something that should cut across every member of the team, right? Because it kind of like seems it's sorry, it's more around engineers currently, and like you rightly mentioned, for an example, images come from the marketing aspect. It comes from the photographers or the designers, depending on where that's coming from. And if the literacy goes across the entire team, as a designer, you understand why there's the need for web performance. And if it's possible, you can try not to give us the best, highest quality that will result in the highest file size, and that will cause issues for the engineering team and stuff like that. So literacy should cut across every member of the team, and I think that will go a long way.
I'll answer this with a question, or rather something. So when I think about YouTube, where I want to upload a YouTube video, right? Because I'm a YouTuber as well. And then I upload this video that maybe is like 1.1 gig. And then when someone is watching that video, based on maybe it defaults to maybe based on something like your internet speed, or you also have the ability to choose what resolution you want to watch, because going through that whole uploading the video process, there's also like, you know, processing the video that happens and then compressing into like, you know, different formats that serve people based on maybe where they are or what they want to watch or whatever the metric is. So like I want to know why that isn't really something that really happens with images today on websites, where let's say the URL to the image wasn't the URL to the direct resource like / / something the WebP or the JPEG, but it was just more a URL to identify that this is an image, right? And then based on, and maybe because I'm a backend engineer, I'm sort of like talking like this, and then based on something like your internet connection, preferably since you are on like from a web page, right? You shouldn't be the one saying that you want to see this type of image or something, except you are on a website that explicitly wants to give that experience for specific reasons, right? Why isn't it so that I can go to streamyard.com/images/cats, and then it just, maybe if I am on maybe a not so great internet connection, it returns the lowest resolution cat image of that same image. And if I'm on maybe a wider screen, a higher resolution screen, and things like that, better internet, it returns a much more higher resolution. Why isn't that something that we're talking about? And why isn't that something that really happens today?
So it is possible. I don't know if you're familiar with client hints, but it's a content negotiation mechanism that enables a site to essentially tell the browser that it wants to decide on which resource to deliver based on certain criteria. So one of them could be network speed, which is based on historical data, but still it's better than nothing. Or screen DPR or viewport dimensions. So this is something that is supported by Chromium browsers, unfortunately not other engines, and is supported by at least some image CDNs that enable you to do this exact kind of content negotiation, and where the designers are uploading a high quality pristine image, and then servers are negotiating a lower quality version potentially for users that need that, basically delivering the exact quality image required for each user. So this is something that is already supported on the web and supported by at least some image CDN services for supporting browsers. So yeah, the one difference with videos is that videos typically download over a long time, which enables them to do more precise adaptation to bandwidth. Where images, typically it's a single request. Videos are composed of multiple requests, and the video players can use the first request and response in order to adjust the second one. Where for images, it's just a single request. That's like one technical difference, but generally, what you're describing is already possible. I wish it was more common, but yeah.
Well, and thank you very much for that, Yoav. I was actually, waiting for you to chime in. I'm forgetting the name of the API right now, and it's bothering me. I hit my head a few times. I don't know what's going on. But what I wanted to say is, yeah, exactly, because videos will have intra content changes. So there are days where you might watch a video and it'll go blurry for a second and then it'll clean up again. those are the changes taking place within the video itself, like, no, within the video delivery. And you can see, like, I mean, gentleman by the name of Steven Robertson, I think, is a client-side engineer at YouTube. He's given a few talks about that, and he kind of breaks it down. And video deliveries, if you think images are complicated, put on your seatbelt, because a video is even crazier, and it's super interesting. But Yoav, what's the name of the API that lets us make those changes
So
at the
client hints.
No, it's something else. Maybe. I feel
It's an
bad
API,
now.
but are you thinking of adaptive streaming?
Maybe. I can't remember now. I'm like going through some of my old talks. I'm like, I know it's here somewhere. I know I've talked about it. But anyhow, but yeah, that's something that's definitely possible. I mean, I talked about the idea of being in like poor conditions and getting like the SVG instead of a full, JPEG, depending on the conditions that you're experiencing at that very moment. So these are very possible. But guess what? I'm going to get back to the literacy. If you don't know about this, you won't use it. You know what I mean? So these things are super duper important in moving forward in performance. And that's why I think literacy is going to be my raison d'être this year for sure.
Very good. Well, believe it or not, an hour has already passed. I know that we could just keep going on this all day, and certainly I think everyone would enjoy it, but we all have other obligations to get back to. So thank you, everybody, for joining. As we like to say, the conversation doesn't have to end here. Please reach out and see the Twitter tags for the people that have added it, for all these fine individuals and panelists that we've had today, and continue having that conversation and asking those questions. I'm going to go around and give everybody an opportunity to give any last thoughts or shout outs that they want to give, and I'm just going to do it as I see people on the screen here. So Bolaji, you want to start?
Sure, cool. We've talked about performance, for the past 1 hour, and that's kind of like one issue that e-commerce, face, right? And this is because of the monolithic architecture that many businesses kind of still stick to. So, right, if you're trying to, increase your kind of like trying to build for global brands and trying to scale your business, you might want to consider checking out Commerce Layer, where we're building commerce APIs that allow you to leverage on the headless architecture to, build better commerce experiences on the web and several other sales channels. So yeah, thank you all.
Great. Katie?
My closing remarks are, I don't know, we were talking about images at the end. It's easy to forget to optimize your images by hand. Like, I really care about performance. Sometimes I forget. Just automate it. Create a pipeline. Use an image CDN. Computers are very good at that, and they don't forget. So, yeah. I guess another thing we touched on is if you're adding things to your site, you don't necessarily even have to do a fancy testing thing, but add to the page and see how the performance changes and what gets loaded. So that's it for me.
Great. Adora?
All I'm just going to say is that the conversation doesn't have to end and shouldn't end here. You should try to do things on your own or start more conversations about this so that you can learn from other people and, learn more things that could help you create a better web, basically.
Great. Thank you. Yoav?
Yeah, I would just like to say that if y'all are interested in getting more involved in web performance related standards, the Web Performance Working Group is a great place to do that, and hit me up. Yeah, always happy to have more web developer folks join.
Great. Jay?
Yeah, it's been nice talking to everyone. And I'm not the one who's here to give sage advice. Just yeah, my main advice in performance is maybe know what your tags are doing, and yeah, make I think auditing and testing are very important.
Great. And Henri, round us out, buddy.
How did I just end up last? Amazing. Hey, first of all, I had a pleasure. Thank you for having me. I love these conversations. And as was mentioned, I'm happy to take that conversation back online to Twitter. You can find me at that handle right there. But um, as I said, I think performance has grown in visibility, in importance. I'm happy to sort of help, folks in their endeavors. Um, I mean, let's address the elephant in the room. Yes, web page test will help you, deal with some of these issues. The fact is, you just have to measure. You can't sit there and guess that it's going to be pretty decent. You're like, yeah, it should be all right. Just test it, figure out what's going on, find your issues, find your bottlenecks, and hopefully you'll be able to sort of update your app so that it can, as someone mentioned in the chat, so it can load well and fairly fast in China. Because one thing that I did not mention is, like, I'm a big fan of the emerging markets. For the Googlers in the room, if you can set me up with the people at NBU, the next billion users team, I'd love to talk to them, because I think the biggest market, growing market, all arrows point to Africa. You know what I mean? And I think it's very important to understand that sort of connectivity is not G7 across the world. And that's why you have to measure, you have to test. So with that being said, thank you very much again for the conversation. I really enjoyed myself.
Great. Thank you again, everybody. And if you like this format, hopefully we will see you back here next week for the state of Angular. But otherwise, everyone have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.